Thank you, Jody, for that handover. So now we're ready to start our session 3. So we will be having a little bit of ITSM story time with Chaz Grundy. So now we'd like to turn it over to you, Chaz. He's from the University of Notre Dame, and we're ready for our ITSM story time.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share screen here now because that's what we do in the world of Zoom, isn't it? So let's see here. But I also still want to see all your lovely faces. And so I have to adjust my windows. Sweet. All right, we are here. Cool. So welcome to ITSM Story Time. This is going to be 20 minutes of, or 19 minutes. I'll try to keep it tight here, of fables and failures, mostly my failures, of IT service management throughout the last, I don't know, in 9 or 10 years that I've joined our central IT organization here. So let's kick this off first with a story of power, literal power. My wife and I bought a house in 2015. About 3 years later, she comes to me and says, our electric bill is pretty expensive. I said, how much is it? She's the one who pays the bills. I don't even see it. And she says, it's like $200 a month. I said, that does seem awfully high. Like, how much should it be? I do a little research and find out that in our area, in our region, our neighborhood, a house like ours should cost about $100 a month. And for some reason, we're spending $200. Do a little bit of brainstorming. Where is this going? Well, we have this chest freezer in the basement. So the first thing we think of is this big chest freezer in the basement. It works beautifully, but it's pretty old. It needs to be defrosted every few, 2 or 3 times a year. And it's due to be defrosted. I said, why don't I unplug that and defrost it? And we'll just leave it unplugged for a month and see what happens. And a month later, she comes and says, you'll never believe it. Our electric bill went down to $100. That's right. The freezer in the basement cost us $100 a month to keep powered on. I'll show you this. They stopped making, Sears stopped selling this brand in 1972. On the inside of the lid, somebody wrote years when they had defrosted it, dates that they had defrosted it, going back as far as 1980. And so needless to say, we did not plug it back in. In fact, I put it up on Facebook Marketplace and sold it. When they tried to offer me money, I said, no, you can just take it for free because they're going to need that money. But we went and bought a new freezer, Energy Star compliant, and it's estimated to cost us $50 a year in electricity. So where's the ITSM story here? Well, I'll tell you what, I went to work and I kept thinking, what other freezers are we running? What freezers are we running here in our data center or around campus or anywhere that still work, but they cost us way more than it's actually worth to keep running? You know, the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, maybe it's time to revisit and broaden that word broken. Our next story is when we rolled out problem management, we were struggling with getting people to understand because ITSM is not a very sexy and accessible vernacular, right? We have lots of terms and phrases, and you want to say value stream and watch people's eyes glaze over. And so how do you get people around to some of these things? So one of our colleagues came up with this great story. He said, you go out to the car in the morning and you see there's a flat tire. So what do? You put air in the tire and you drive to work. You come home, next morning you go out there and there's a flat tire again. It's still flat. It's like, oh, whoa, okay. So you put air in the tire. Now, a normal, sane, rational person at this point says, there's something wrong with the tire. I need to figure out what it is. And they find that there's a nail in the tire. You pull out the nail, you put it in the plug, or you take it somewhere that does that kind of thing. They fix the tire, you fill it up, and now you've resolved the issue, right? You've taken care of the problem. Most of us would not go out and say, well, I guess part of my morning routine from forever on now is to put air in the tire every single morning because it always goes flat every morning, right? That seems like a really seriously stupid thing to do. And yet, how many systems do we have that we schedule to reboot once a day or twice a day or whatever? Because, well, if I don't, there's a memory leak and it'll crash and then we're going to have an outage. And so I can prevent the outage by just doing, putting air in the tire every single morning. So when we walked through this thing, we actually laid this out and said, listen, problem management is like this, right? You have an incident, tire is flat. So I resolved it. Cool. But when it happened again, and most of us said, oh, I think there's a pattern forming here, I realized that that incident is not resolved. It's really more of a workaround when I put air in the tires. So there's an underlying issue, and that's our problem. So now I'm going to form a problem team. Now it happens that it's me in the garage, looking at the tire. That's me, a problem team of one. But why is it going flat? Root cause analysis. What's the root cause? It's a nail. Cool. I remove the nail, I plug the hole. Now I've solved this thing and I resolve my problem. So that's a lot more accessible to people, and that helped click for people what it was we were talking about. Now, in this project that we did last year, we also struggled with the part where form a problem team sounds a lot like extra work. So what do you mean? You want me to get on some little team and work on this thing in addition to all my other job like that? Why would I do that? Also, problem teams, not super exciting, right? Resolve a problem. You know what's way more interesting and engaging? A mystery. So we borrowed a little bit of a theme, and we themed our whole project around, you guessed it, Scooby-Doo, the mystery gang. So when we have a problem, you think about, I've got to form a team, I have to investigate, I have to get down to the cause of this thing. What is this? It's not the most exciting thing, right? But it's enough to get you thinking, well, maybe, okay, I see where this is. We're going to solve this mystery. It's a mystery that needs to be solved, and it's not just a boring problem team. So we sent people Scooby snacks. By the way, this was right after we all went and started working from home, so it was a lot more complicated to mail people Scooby snacks than it would have been if we had just been in the office. But we had, a little theme song that we recorded on a ukulele of all things. And my favorite is one of my colleagues put together this next clip here.
This ghost really doesn't need any introduction. As soon as we clean him up, I'm sure you'll recognize him. There. Look familiar?
Unpatched servers.
Like in person.
So in case you couldn't hear that, because it was really quiet on my end as well, he says, look who it is, and it's unpatched servers. So we have this, we had a little bit of fun with it. Our next story is back to the appliances route for whatever reason. Another project we did over the last year or so is to establish a series of guiding principles and architectural standards. Again, the most exciting titles and terms you could come up with. And one of the challenges is trying to get IT staff around campus to jump in and say, yeah, I understand you have this standard, and so I'm going to try to fit and work within your standard. A lot of times it's not something you can enforce. It's something we're trying to educate and get them to buy in on. So how do you convince people to do this? Well, one of our enterprise architects tells us a story about him and his wife buying a new refrigerator that replaced a refrigerator they had, older one, and he measured the space and everything. But he went with this cool new model. It has the French doors instead of the one side door kind of thing. And well, when it got delivered and the delivery people put it in there, the guys looked at it and said, that's not going to open, right? It turns out when he'd measured it on the assumption that it would fit into the space, but he didn't measure it with the doors swinging open. So he had to knock out a wall to try to fit this thing. And they figured that was actually the better solution than sending it back, ordering a different thing, trying to find one of a different size, because they really liked this fridge that they had. So our talented graphic designer, Casey Keel, made up a little cartoon to help sell this story. The idea that when we have existing tools and systems and software, sometimes it's a lot easier and more efficient to work with the things we have, even if they're not 100% the thing that would meet all of those needs. Because the cost of getting to that 100%, as opposed to settling for, say, 95%, can be enormous, right? Implementing a new thing, working in other systems, all the other stuff that goes with it. If you've ever heard the phrase shaving a yak, that's kind of the story that you're talking about in some of these systems. So when we have people go off to a conference, see some new cool thing, and then come back and say, hey, I want to buy this, a lot of times that conversation is, we have something on campus that does something very similar to this. Let's explore that and see if we can work in that first. So our last series of stories here for the next 10 minutes are all along a certain theme. So this first part here, I'm going to borrow from one of my favorite acts. This is Apollo Robbins. He has a great TED Talk called The Art of Misdirection. He was also one of the hosts of National Geographic's Brain Games. And he is a pickpocket, professional pickpocket. The Gentleman Thief is a great Vegas show, apparently, that's been very successful. I love watching his stuff. So I borrowed this concept from him, and he talks about where your attention and focus are. When we go to, say, shut down or end of life or retire a service, what are we doing? We're taking something away from people. When you take something away from people, you walk up to them in their space. What do? They put up a barrier. They get defensive. My focus is on you, and you're in my space. You're going to take something away from me. And over my dead body, right? Like that's the phrase that they don't always say out loud, but sometimes they do. But our job is to go in and try to figure out, how do we take this thing away? And you can rip it right out of their hands. And of course, now you have a screaming, crying baby on the other side. I have 4 kids at home, so that's where my head went. Apollo's trick here is not to go in directly. He puts his hand out, a coin, a card, something in his hand, and draws your attention to that. And then he keeps that there and he pivots around that point until he's standing next to you. And you're both standing side by side looking at this thing together. Now he's in your space, but you never even realized he stepped into it. At that point, he can reach around there and pull out your wallet, your keys, your phone, whatever it is you have, but because your attention is still out in front. Where's this fit into IT service management? When you go to take things away from people, usually their focus is not really actually on the tool. The reason they want this tool, this service, why their attention is there, is because of the problem it solves for them. Your job, when you're taking things away, is to go listen for that problem, to identify that, put their focus on that problem, and then you pivot around that and you help them solve the problem in a way that doesn't require the old tool. Once you've done that, picking their pocket and taking away that service goes much, much easier. I'm saying this from the perspective of the guy that walks in to a place and everybody says, oh, great, what is IT taking away now? Because I've screwed this up so many times by ripping it right out of their hands and leaving a crying, screaming faculty member. And instead, I've learned that I can focus on that problem that they're solving. Oh, the reason you need this system is because it does this in a secure way. Okay, awesome. Let's talk about security and how do we solve your security need in some other way, for instance. So we're going to jump into another tremendous failure of mine. When we moved to Google, we left behind Microsoft Exchange. We'd been in an Exchange for 6 years and we were very excited about Google. It was all about going Google. It's so exciting, all this kind of stuff. Look at all the great features, all the space, everything like that. And it really did also involve trashing Exchange. I mean, we talk about Exchange openly, like it's the evil Exchange empire and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the project, we got the project team together and we had a funeral. It was more of a wake, actually. We held it at a bar, had drinks. I made a tombstone. We had a server. I read a eulogy, which was very funny and all in good taste and everything, but it was incredibly insensitive. It was insensitive because one of the team members, Paul, was an Exchange administrator. He had built up his career being great at managing Exchange. And while we were ready to move on to Google, he's looking at this thinking, what's this going to do to my job? We hired him to run Exchange, and here we were 6 or 7 years later, leaving it behind. And he's got to think, where's my career go next? Because you don't need an Exchange administrator to run Google. What's in store for me? And I'm sitting here trashing Exchange. We're laughing about it, right? And he's got to be anxious and nervous. Now, Paul's a good friend of mine, and we've talked through this, and we're great. But I learned a lesson here that language really does matter. This is where I came up with this concept of retiring a service instead of end of life, retiring a service. And that's because language really does matter. When you talk about retirement, you have a party. People are thinking about, oh, great, what are you going to do in retirement? What's that next step for you? It's an opportunity. And we thank them for their service and we toast their accomplishments. At a funeral, people are crying, right? People are sad. You have a eulogy, right? And with retirement, you plan for it, you schedule it. You say, I know this is coming here, so what do we need to do to prepare for the next stage? Let's just say that death and scheduling don't go hand in hand very well. So I think the language matters part here helped us shift the way that we thought about it and helped us change the approach to the projects we had. When we went to go retire services, we started planning for them as in somebody's going to leave my team and they're going to retire. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to transition. I need to plan. How am I going to get from here to there? Everybody's anxious, but we're going to get through it together. And that leads us to our final story of the session. So learning from this lesson, a couple of years later, we went and we retired the LSOF listserv product. We have been on listserv for 31 years. We were one of the first 10 customers of LSOF listserv. And in leaving this behind, you had a lot of history and you had a lot of people's hands all over this thing. And the lessons that we really focused on when we were moving, because we ended up migrating stuff over and moving over to Google Groups and doing all this work, was how do we do this in a way that recognizes and celebrates listserv? So my project lead on that, Paul, different Paul, threw a party, got a cake, and invited all of our IT organization, invited back past staff, people who had retired, who had worked on supporting and administering listserv over the years. He even thanked, in fact, it was the same Paul that worked on Exchange, was one of the administrators on listserv. And we gave prizes and told stories, and people got up and told old stories and gave toasts, and it was a lot of fun. People were smiling and laughing. And contrast this to that feeling of what you saw in a funeral with an Exchange tombstone. As funny as that might have been, this was such a more positive way to go out, to recognize all those people, celebrate their accomplishments as we look forward to the future, but not forgetting all of that. Because at the end of this, at the end of any retirement project, that service may go away, but those people who worked on it, those people who work with you every single day, they'll still be there. And those relationships are crucial. So that is the end of our story time. I'm Chaz Grundy. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. The slides are also available there. Thank you all so much.
Wow, wasn't that a great set of stories from Chaz? Thank you so much. There are a few gems there that I definitely will be taking back to our organization as we continue to mature in IT service management.